Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns Those Anti-Federalists. They absolutely got it right. Continues to prove itself out every single day. And this is Tom Novolis, your host. Glad to have you back. Glad to have you back here with me on Liberty Works Radio Network and at Soaring Eagle Radio. It's just a delight to be able to discuss what is happening from those mirrors of history. So, in taking and returning with you this week, so much to cover, so much to cover. And looking at it from a perspective of maybe a John Kennedy book that I was brought back to my attention in what he wrote, well, he and whoever his ghostwriters were and others, Profiles in Courage. I was duly impressed by that, primarily because of what is happening in relationship to all of the insanities of the enemies that I've talked about over and over again in the Democrats and relative to the impeachment issues. I was impressed with an article that took and brought me to a picture of one of the people that actually Kennedy wrote about, and that is a Senator Ross. And I found that particular article in the New American dealing with the impeachment and trial of none other than a Mr. Johnson, Andrew Johnson, who became president. He was vice president under Lincoln, ended up becoming president at the when Lincoln was assassinated. I wanted to take a moment though and read to you this opening paragraph. Let's see, here it goes. Opponents reviled the president, even accusing him of various and sundry crimes. Some in Congress attempt to portray him as a would-be dictator who consistently disregarded the Constitution of the United States. Others express shock at his boorish, unpresidential behavior, arguing that he was no longer, quote, fit to retain the office of president, end quote. They particularly denounced what they described as his, quote, intemperate, inflammatory, and scandalous harangues, end quote. For his part, the president denounced his detractors by name, accusing them of desiring to, quote, destroy our institutions, end quote, and welcome the vitriol against his enemies coming from those in the audience at his raucous political rallies. His detractors detested him, largely because he was perceived as the major obstacle in advancing their radical political agenda. The president even had to deal with and eventually fire a high-ranking member of his own administration who was in league with his opponents in Congress. And the article kind of continues on saying that while you think that this describes Trump, in reality, who it's talking about is that Civil War president, Andrew Johnson. And I think that you should go to the link that I have in the archives on this particular article because it is amazing the parallelisms. But in this case, it wasn't the Democrats who were the opponents of the president who were taking and trying to stop him from executing his office. No, in fact, it was the Republicans. And once again, I call them Republicans for that very reason that there's more often in history that they repudiate so many different things. And this being one during that whole period right after the Civil War, where it comes down to what are people thinking? What is good governance? What does that really mean when it comes to assaults on power, assault ideas relative to power? How does one express that? What does it mean to follow constitutionality in a true effect? But more importantly, what has struck me, not only in what I really piled on 2 weeks ago, but over these last couple weeks in the course of preparing for this program and doing a deeper dive into Sam Adams again, doing a deeper dive into the likes of some of the sermons during the foundational era, doing that deep dive on one of my many favorites, if you will, from that foundational period, a contemporary with Sam Adams being none other than my Witherspoon. Hmm. I, it goes back to the simple functional diatribe that I have in that being the extensibility of the gospel. So when I think about that, and I think about what had transitioned in the 1830s, the fact that we made into this movement prior to that Civil War period of time was that transition into the social gospel. We saw so many points of that time that the Second Great Awakening's emergence didn't was a social gospel emergence in so many different ways. Didn't get into those core fundamentals of how uh, one lives from that biblical point of view. There was, once again, so many efforts that were happening that brought salvation to many, and but never carried through on what does that mean for the whole living of the individual. So part of what has been bothering me, and part of what I've talked about and threatened about, and I still haven't done it because, man, we're jamming. And when I say we're jamming, we're literally jamming around here with Pepperlicious, and what we've been doing here in Ohio with making jams. We're having some really good success. So it's kind of consumed some of my time to do what I threatened with on, maybe preaching. Yeah, I can't imagine that anyway, nor can you. But the point is that it all absolutely does come back to what is one's basic theology. What is one's concept of eschatology, the end times, and the expectations on how kingdom functions and operates? What does it come down to in one's understanding of kingdom mindedness from that foundational perspective within the context of the cultural environment, the geopolitical environment that you're living in? How does that function? Where have we moved from the dictatorial perspective that just embodied Christian persecution during that first century church, which in effect was a resistance to the political movements of the day that were ungodly. And it was keeping in the context what was and continues to be to this very day kingdom mindedness. And that doesn't mean sticking your head in the sand or pushing your head in the clouds and living a spiritualized, pietistic life. No, that means how are you involved in your culture, making that difference, having those conversations, and through that, allowing the Holy Spirit then to take and function and work in a way that not only makes a difference in the lives of people, but as you and I live what it is in that kingdom mindedness, that activity, that purposefulness. That is what makes the difference then in society, where especially in our constitutional republic, we should not be where we are today, simply because the churches and the individuals have been living in social gospel with their head in the clouds and more often buried in the sand. So that means they're upside down. Well, anyway, you can imagine the picture of what's really pointing to the clouds if their heads are buried in the sand. So that's interesting. It becomes very, very interesting then. Where would you find an example of real Christian community? And I have to take and say, and we'll talk about it more in the second and third segments because I want to bring out some of the thoughts around what people are saying about Sam Adams, what Witherspoon was saying as well, and maybe a note, if I have the time, of one of the sermons that I was going through from that foundational era. But anyway, let's take a look here in wrapping up the last several minutes is that I would again appeal to you to go read this article on the impeachment of President Andrew Johnson, and that it was one individual that stood in courage against his other fellow Republicans and voted that Johnson was innocent of all the various charges. And it was a kangaroo court, no different than it's a kangaroo court by the demons right now. The parallelisms are uncanny when it comes to that old saying that there's nothing new under the sun, and that if you don't learn from history, you're going to repeat it. And in the case of what was happening here, it was all about power. It was all about wanting their way. And Senator Ross stood up and fought for true constitutionalism in a manner of conscience and understanding of how truth should work. So, again, this is a great, well done article relative to the impeachment of President Johnson there right after the Civil War. Now, as I continue to consider that in what is happening with President Trump and how we're seeing that the Democrats are pulling every shenanigan that they possibly can, man, I'll tell you, you got to look at history. You have to consider that these folks are doing exactly as I have talked about over and over, in that their power desires are fully anti-God, socialist, communist, Cossack plan, means, methodology, and purposes. They understand the Constitution so much better than the rest of the citizenry that they are actually using constitutional process against we, the people, and against how we should function as a constitutional republic. To that point, what it gets to, and Kathy likes that, to that point, what it ends up getting to is that they are and have been positioning for over 100 years to execute the Cossack plan. Remember that when was it? 1846. That was the year that your good old communist buddy took and wrote his diatribes, and all of that started moving into the churches, started moving into government, started moving into education to the extent that here we are today. So interesting when we look at that. And who is supposed to stop it? As the Federalists expected that it would be a moral and virtuous people that would stop the insanities and ensure that we maintained our republic and that the Constitution could function according to its presumed design. Well, you know where you get moral and virtuous people from. So with that, I expect that you will be coming back to the next segment to join up and hear more about Sam Adams and Witherspoon And knowing that, yes, they did, those anti federalists, they unequivocally got it right. And I am so delighted to be back with you. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this second segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti federalists continue to absolutely get it correct. And this is Tom the Bullish, your host. So delighted to be with you. Welcome back again to all of those on Liberty Works Radio Network, as well as we will hopefully the folks there at Soaring Eagle will jump on and join the YouTube or go look at the archives at samueladamsreturns.net. I always forget to do that. So what I always do in this segment is ask you to take and go look at all the other programming at Liberty Works Radio Network. I mean, that's really good stuff. I get the daily inputs on what's happening during the week and who the different speakers will be on the programs. And if you're not signed up for that newsletter, you really need to do that because you can then choose as to see what all is happening with that live programming. Again, go look at all the hosts and hostesses and pick and choose those folks that you're really interested in listening to, and that'll expand all of what you think about. But more importantly, what's going to allow you to take and move to action. Move to action. That's something I want to cover real quick here before we get into more of Sam Adams is an article that I found in The Federalist. Very interesting article. And this is one that even challenges all of us that are here at Liberty Works Radio Network, at Soaring Eagle, or anywhere else. Is this article is in The Federalist. It was done by David Hines, and it's called Why Conservatives Need to Stop Sending So Many Pundits to College Campuses. I thought this was a fantastic, fantastic article. When we look at all the talking heads out there, all of them, and I don't care whether that's the talking heads on TV, I don't care if it's the Candace Owens, the Charlie Kirks, the this ones, that ones. I don't care if it's even me or a lot of the other people that are out there trying to do. How many people is basically the challenge is how many of us really need to be out there? How many of us are really listened to? I appreciate every one of you that listen to me on this program, whether it's following me on YouTube, and I appreciate those that follow on YouTube. I guess, how do other people do it? Let me think here for a second. They go, if you really, Huckabee's doing it now. I mean, everybody, all of these folks, if you really like what you're hearing here, would you go down below and click like? And not only that, click the follow me and make sure that the bell is on so that when a new program arrives that you're made aware of it. The only thing I have not put on is monetizing this. I ask you to go to samueladamsreturns.net occasionally, not all the time, to go take in, buy one of the books. That helps fund this. Other than that, you know what? I'm all self-funded. So take it for what that's worth. And that's with many, many, many true patriots. But this article, again, in the Federalist, this article, and I'm going to tell you the title. Again, it's in the archives, so you can go, to the link and read it for yourself. Why conservatives need to stop sending so many pundits to the college campuses. What is that all about? Here it is. If you're the speaker going from college town to college town, giving a stump speech to crowds of impressed young people is a pretty decent way to live. It's good for the ego, good for the wallet, and probably gets you invited to great parties every so often. But what if you're a college student? Is the next paragraph. For them and for the rest of us, there's much less tangible benefit. Treating righty students as if their purpose is to provide A cushy lifestyle for righty pundits funded out of donors' pockets or college activity fees doesn't help make a difference on the campus they live on. Instead, righty students are taught to admire evangelists and pundits, and to themselves aspire to be an evangelism or a punditry. This has produced a conservative grassroots obsessed with the importance of sharing ideas, but with no understanding of how to carve out the space for those ideas to take root or to enact them in any way but with the brute force of state power. I give that heavy sigh. So this is what's happened also with evangelicals or anybody else in Christianity. Uh, I don't care whether it's Roman Catholicism, Baptist, non-denominationalist, whatever, is that it's listen, go in and listen to the expert, go listen to the super preacher, even go listen to the smaller preacher. But where is it that develops action and community that is carried out to make a significant change? I say this often at the end of the program or in my promos is get your butts out of the seats and your feet's on the streets. It's interesting is that with a business partner of mine, we were going through and taking, and he's out doing presentations, and he's been invited to different tea parties and this, that, and the other thing, and some of these different events. And the issue that comes about most often is same folks that show up at not just their own event, they take and they show up at another tea party event, a few towns away. They're willing to travel. They're also willing to sit there and hear the same message, and they're willing to throw their same old shoes at their TV, and they're willing to listen, listen, listen. And what does it mean for them to go out and do something? And the average age of any of those that would be somewhat activist, many of them not, are 55 and older. 55 and older are willing to at least put some money into things, and in many cases they're not. They're not willing to put any money into anything, no action. But then when you're taking, you sit there and then they wonder, and everybody wonders, even wonder inside the churches, where are the young people? Why can't we attract the young people? So inside the churches, what do? Let's bring in the rock and roll, or let's bring in this music, or let's bring in that, or let's change the activity, and let's make it more activity, and let's do this, let's do that. Well, the let's do doesn't do is the problem. It ends up being do. Quite frankly, it's all a bunch of do. What it means to actually look at that grassroots conservatism that is not obsessed with the big names, Christianity that's not obsessed with all of the pastors who are there's pundits. They're no different than pundits. They're no different than any of those. Okay, I'll hide those on YouTube. I'm waving my hands to hide my books. Those folks that write books and do all of that. Well, that's what you're supposed to do. If you want to be known, is write a book, get out there, do your blogs, do your podcasts, get out there and have all those speaking engagements and, get your thumbs up under your suspenders and just take and pop them back into your chest. Yeah, listen to me. I apologize if I'm perceived that way because that is never ever going to be or has been my intent. My intent is always to take and try and bring those mirrors of history so that we as a people can be that functional community. that we can take, and when it comes time for elections, that we vote with a type of sensibility that is twofold. It is God honoring, number one, first and foremost, God honoring. Secondly, what it becomes is that it is the correct execution and vote for the liberties that are guaranteed within our state and federal constitution. No more. Not building massive bureaucracies. Not building massive bureaucracies. We just had a number of levies. I vote no on every levy, regardless of what it is, because I think that every aspect of what the levies are there for can be better served within the private context of the community and the churches. But as I always say, the churches have taken and thrown away their responsibility because of the same issue here is that you go and you listen, you hear the word of God. Do you? You really hear it? You listen, but do you really hear how the Spirit intended for and Jesus intended for us to be kingdom minded and implement his truths here on earth? If he is going to make every nation under his footstool, how's he going to do that? It's not saying that he's getting up. In the book of Revelations, it says when he comes back, he's coming back as a warrior swinging his sword with a bloody stained, dripping in blood robes. And it's not from him hanging on a cross this time, it's from him swinging that sword. And so the word of God is the sword that proceeds from his mouth in such a way that it should cut asunder in a manner that causes us to live and implement kingdom. Wow. How are we supposed to do that? How do you take and act on the word of God? It's not going thumping somebody up the side of the head with the Bible. It's not just preaching to them in their faces. How are you that mature, moral individual at work? How are you that mature, moral individual in your home? How is it that you, as a business owner, function and implement biblical minded what? Means and ways of dealing with your employees? How do you hold morality, biblical morality, to the highest perspective, kingdom mindedness in the extensibility of everything in life? Sam Adams did. I'll try and touch on that in the third segment. This is the issue, and this is even a core question. Why do you send so many pundits? Hey, it's a cushy living, it's all these things and making a lot of bucks out there. Don't kid yourself. Those pundits are putting a lot in the pocketbook there. The secret is that in most cases, the minimum to get somebody, once you're in a speaker's bureau, is like $20,000, plus all the security, plus, 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 plus. You can probably get somebody for 5 or 10 occasionally, but most often it is around $20,000 minimum to get one of these pundits to show up on a college campus, or to show up at your Lincoln Day dinner, or to show up at some other event. At some point in time, you may get someone a little cheaper than that. But often, unless they're a passionate patriot, you better have some deep pockets. Sam Adams didn't have anything in his pockets. In fact, he lived in rags and he died, pretty poor. Where are you for being that patriot? I think that Mr. Bevan, when in his speech prior to Trump coming into town there on that day, he called it out. What are you willing to sacrifice? Not just for the republic. What are you willing to sacrifice for the kingdom? because the two, in reality, are hand in hand. So we'll touch a little bit more on this because, see, this is the stuff that the anti federalists talked about. This is the stuff that Sam Adams lived out. This is called really living liberty and the extensibility of the gospel. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to this third segment of Samuel Adams Returns. He got it right. Those anti-federalists, they absolutely got it right. And this is Tom Navolis, your host. And you know what? I kept forgetting in the first two segments is to remind you to go to samueladamsreturns.net, where you can find the archives, the video, the promo, and all of the links for today's program. So, in the quiet of his study, in the silent hours of the night, while the town was sleeping, he sat at his table thinking and writing with one grand end in view: the defense and maintenance of human rights. Industriously and wholly self-forgetful, he worked on enlightening his townsmen and the colonists of the great fundamental principles of human government, until his name was a power over all the land, and its echoes made the British throne tremble. Bancroft well calls him, quote, a masterly statesman and the ablest political writer in New England, end quote. His plans, whenever brought before the people, were so well matured, so broad, deep, and consistent, so carefully guarded in expression and interest as, to use his own motto, to, quote, keep the enemy in the wrong, end quote. So simple and just, and yet so comprehensive that the people believed in them and in him, and naturally looked upon him as the children of Israel looked upon Moses, as the only one divinely chosen to lead them from the house of political bondage to the political Canaan. It is no wonder that the loyalist governor, who, in his council chamber in the old State House in Boston, trembled before the pointed finger and mighty words of the pure patriot, wrote to his master that, quote, he, being Adams, has obtained such an ascendancy as to direct the town of Boston and the House of Representatives, and consequently the council, just as he pleases, end quote. And that he, quote, is perhaps as well qualified to excite the people to any extravagance in theory or practice as any person in America, end quote. It goes on and on and on, talking about Samuel Adams as the last Puritan, the last Puritan. A couple things that I want to point out and follow up with here today is that Sam Adams' whole statement there, his motto, is what the Democrats have picked up on, and the Republicans refuse to pick up on. And the patriots out there have very little clue about and are afraid because of bad theology, especially the Christian patriots of bad theology, is the motto. Keep the enemy in the wrong. See, instead, what we see here is that what we have with the Democrats and the news media is that they're keeping the Republicans and all of the patriots in the wrong, in the headlights, in the flashing lights out there, saying we are wrong, we're wrong, we are wrong, and all Trump is wrong. Flash, flash, flash. And those on the radio, you can't see me flashing my hands, but on YouTube, you had enough of it. I understand. I get it. Now, Sam Adams understood the fullness of the gospel, the extensibility of the gospel, in that he lived it in every aspect of his life. He wasn't a good businessman. He's definitely lets people know that. Very poor. His family was poor. He had what his father left him by virtue of a will. But other than that, he never made a lot of money. He didn't go after doing anything for self gratification, for power. What did it say at the beginning here? Is that he worked so hard. He did everything in his writings, in his end. The grand view of it all was the defense and maintenance of human rights. How do you know what those are? We have the Human Rights Amendment. We have all of these people, LGBTQ, ST, LMZ, whatever, ever alphabet soup you have out there that are saying it's my human right. No, come on. If you want to know what the human rights are and you want to qualify that, quantify it, define it in every aspect of truth that there is, you're only going to find it from biblical point of view and reference. And I have to say that, I'll stay with the fundamental views and references of those biblical truths, those Calvinistic truths, those Heidelberg Catechism truths, and so on. But the Reformation truths, okay? I always say that. Sam Adams was that last Puritan because not only did he understand all of those fundamental truths from the ideas of those early reformers, but what else did he understand? He understood the application of those truths as he saw them being exercised during the Reformation. And what does that mean from a whole kingdom perspective? Does it mean that we have just purely a Christian society? Well, that's never going to happen. That's never going to happen. It's like I told a friend of mine yesterday or the other day, sometime this past week, that one of the greatest examples of a Christian community that I can think of, if you study it from the total application of what I talk about as the extensibility of the gospel, I would refer everybody to Moscow, Idaho. Go take a visit up there. Go visit Christ Church and see what's happening. So when you see that a church that preaches and teaches the whole Bible, biblical, extensible perspective, has education there, college there, the lower education there, businesses there that function according to those biblical principles and how they even search for funding, how they establish their internal governance, families there, which establishes the whole thing. Then you have those that are also involved or becoming more involved in the political environment there, the cultural environment there, the ministry environment there with their neighbors, with the universities, with the other businesses. They set the example. They set the example by being a cultural, societal segment within the segment that can prove leadership from a kingdom minded perspective, that kingdom minded point of view. Is it glory on earth? No. They're all a bunch of sinners, saved by grace, working through redemption according to biblical truth. So when we look at Sam Adams and what he was talking about in relationship to all of this and in relationship to how he was viewed by others, especially in that, I mean, here's a guy. But, this whole thing on keep the enemy in the wrong, you have to have the correct perspective to do that in such a way that you're not sinning and keeping the enemy in the wrong. But when the enemy are wrong, they're wrong. And the only way that you know they're wrong is that if you have the moral, ethical, biblical capacity to understand that wrongness and bring it out from that perspective. And there is no compromise in that wrongness because the rightness is the rightness of the kingdom and of the king. Remember that I've said before is that Jesus took on the political establishment right into its nose and gave it that left hook. Not right, left. You see? Yeah. He took on the Sanhedrin. He took on the priest. He took on the scribes. He took on those that had perverted everything that the Father had established. Gee, do you think that the Church of Jesus should do the same thing, especially when we have the freedoms and the liberties that were brought together in our constitutional republic where it is required, ladies and gentlemen, that we have a moral and virtuous people to exercise those liberties? Well, I guess you're going to have to go figure that out with your pastors and your elders and all of those that you have in your church group and, figure out if you're going to get your butts out of your seats and actually do something when it comes to the 2020 election. This election, there were some wins here in what was that? November 7th, I think it was. What was Tuesday? The 5th, November 5th. I had to ask Kath. I can't even remember what day of the week it is. Oh, but I mean, some levies were defeated. Good ones that were going to cost taxpayers tens of millions of dollars. About $28 million for a fire station? Give me a break. Anyway, that is part of what is it morally established to allow even education. Defeat those school levies because we know the educational system is perverse. Oh, have you decided to run for the school board yet and bring that moral tenure to education again? Probably not. When are you going to get your butt out of the seat and your feet on the street? You need to for 2020 because guess what? The enemy is keeping us in the wrong. And we're right. We're correct. If you have that moral biblical perspective and understand constitutionalism as intended. If you don't, you better get educated. If you don't, then you need to buy my books. I mean, it's that simple. But the fact of the matter is, to keep the enemy in the wrong, you have to have the fundamental ideas. And then you have to get out, and as it was talking about from that Federalist article, you have to do something. You have to help the youth do something. We have to be involved and not just throw your slippers and shoes at the TV. But it may be that you're so secure in your financial condition that that's okay. You can do that. You can throw your shoes at the TV, or in this case, at your computer or the radio or whatever it is that you happen to be listening or watching this program on. And that's okay. You're financially secure in that, so you really don't care about your liberty because you'll go buy a new TV, you'll go buy a new computer, you'll go buy something new because it's financially easy for you to do, and maybe you throw a couple bucks here or there at something. But the willingness to get out and be all that Bevan challenged people to be, patriots willing to give it all up. That's what Sam Adams did. That's what the Anti-Federalists did. And that's what they expected us to do to keep liberty forever.